open it and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters. Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here tonight on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. What a day it has been. More charges, more Mueller time. Gates pleading guilty. Manafort under deeper piles of you-know-what. Some Trump sanity, or, well, not so much. Another episode of As the Trump Turns. And, of course, the big weekend of action as workers across the entire country take to the streets. In one, to protest the upcoming Janus versus AFSCME case. But two, also to show that, look, workers still have power in this country. And I was just reading an article from Bloomberg News. And the author of the article was talking about all of the things that have stagnated and depressed wages. Because what we're taught in Econ 101, we're taught that as the labor market gets tighter, as companies have to compete for more workers, and this is the wonder of the invisible hand and the free market, and the models are accurate. I'm not debating the models. But we're told that as the market gets tighter, as unemployment falls, wages should go up. And tight labor force, we just saw, a rather reasonable jobs number, 222,000 jobs, even though they were expecting 223. That's not horrible. We're moving a little bit forward. Wages still falling behind. The ability of workers working and making their lives better, not happening because inflation's right there. So any wage gains you may have eroded by a whole plethora of inflationary forces. Healthcare being way up there at the top. And, this guy wrote a good article, very well sourced, and, he's clearly a knowledgeable writer. In fact, somebody who I read quite often and I think is very good. And has in the past written very good articles about labor, but didn't bother to mention the fact that we have a weakened labor movement. That even in times when you had the same kind of climate that we have today, it was the power of collective bargaining that brought more wealth into the working class. And, the reality is, and I called him on it, and he said, yeah, here's an article I had written. And, he's, like I said, a good writer in this. But it's not right in the front or the center of our brains. For me, the very first thing when you talk about stagnant wages is you talk about the fact that workers don't have the bargaining power to demand better wages, better hours, better conditions, all down the line. And on Monday, when the Supreme Court hears the Janus versus AFSCME case, I think it's only going to get worse. So in the second hour, we're going to focus quite a bit on that topic. But I just had to get that out because it's one of those things that just stuck right in the front of my mind. So as I said, Gates going to plead guilty. He's in for some significant time. I mean, the charges that he's pleading guilty to, the two charges, they carry a possible prison sentence of up to 10 years. Now, from what the reports are he'll probably serve for more 5, 6. That's what he'll be sentenced if all of the information proves to be true and it's all useful information and it's all worth going after. Then maybe he will see the 5 to 6 maybe out in a couple with really good behavior. But the question is what is this going to bring? What is this going to bring for Manafort? Because this is his right-hand guy. So I'm going to be quite interested to see how that plays out, as I think we all certainly should be. And also today, President Trump had a press conference with Malcolm Turnbull. Malcolm is the Prime Minister of Australia, and you knew the question about guns had to come up. And you got to give, it's interesting. You watch these two men standing next to each other, and one is clearly not prepared to be on that stage. They were both asked the question about guns, and you knew it had to come up. And the Prime Minister said, look, we're very satisfied with our laws. We maintain them. They're well known, but we certainly don't presume to provide policy or political advice on that matter here. He said, you have an amendment to your Constitution which deals with gun ownership. You have a very different history. He said, we'll focus on our political arguments and debates and wish you wise deliberation in yours. Trump, on the other hand, we're different countries with different problems and all of that. And his mindset is, we're going to take this on we're going to go on the offensive. And you go, yeah, that's going to get there. He hit the NRA talking point. We're not going to solve this by having gun-free zones. No, we need more guns. And look, I don't know whether Trump is someone who is they just fill his head with the talking points and really not quite getting what's going on. I mean, because he throws things out. For instance, he kind of said yesterday that the NRA wouldn't be opposed to an age increase. And I said when I saw that, they go, there's no way in hell the NRA is going to agree to anything when it comes to a restriction on guns. Even the mental health thing that they keep throwing out as a distraction, they don't really mean. They just keep throwing it out as, we've got all we need to solve the psychosis problem. Dana Loesch said that, raising the age is not going to solve the psychosis problem, because it's all these crazy people. And I like to remind people that all the crazy people seem to be sane people before they were crazy. And going in and bought the gun seemed perfectly reasonable. Something set them off the deep end, at which they then snapped. And for me, all of these distractions, all of this other stuff is about getting us away from the reality that it's the guns. It's that simple. Raising the age isn't going to do anything. Background checks might help. Making sure that people with PFAs don't get guns, that's going to help immediately. In fact, if someone gets a PFA, you go to their house and you take their guns. That's a good start. But all down the line, there are things we can do. I say start with banning the assault weapons, as we have done in the past. We saw it worked. Ban high-capacity magazines. We've seen it. It's worked in the past. A good first step. And then, start thinking about some other reasonable and sane ideas on how we move forward as a country. I don't know, maybe having some ways of, when someone is clearly having trouble. Oh, I don't know. Maybe making sure that someone's paying attention. I mean, look, I look at the FBI and look, they dropped the ball. It's also my view that we've got to close the gun show loophole. It should not be easier to buy a used car than it is to buy a gun. I don't know about you, but it's a pain in the neck to go through the process of buying a used car or selling a used car. And the other thing I keep saying is we need to hold gun owners responsible. It is an awesome right. It is an awesome responsibility. And I'm sorry, if your gun is used in a crime, it's your gun. You should be held liable for it. That simple. But Rick, what if someone stole it? Then you should know it's been stolen. If you have so many guns that you go, gee, I just have so many guns I can't keep track of them, that's kind of a problem. You know, if someone steals your car and they run it into something, chances are you're going to be held liable for it. Your car did it. Now, your insurance company will fight it. There'll be a whole bunch of stuff. But still, it's your car. And if it was gone for a week, a month, 6 months, it's not in the driveway anymore, and you just say, it's gone. Oops. Doesn't that seem bizarre? So there are tons of things that we can do, and tons of things we should be doing immediately. In this hour, we're going to talk a little bit about that with our good friend Scott Dworkin, who's going to give us some thoughts on what's going on down in Florida, the whole movement on banning these assault weapons, insane gun policy, and also I'm going to pick his brain about the upcoming and recent Mueller indictments. And I got to tell you, it's going to start. I think it's going to start getting faster. Yesterday, I go, wow, it's not even Friday. We got some indictments. Here on Friday, more indictments. Absolutely enjoying it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Quick break. Right back with Scott Dworkin. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Own 90% of the wealth, 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1969. That was the day black food workers went on strike at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Their strike intersected many points central to the social upheaval of the period, including the rights of public sector workers. Besides extremely low wages, workers complained of racial abuse and discrimination on the job. When the administration ignored their demands, the cafeteria workers sat down at the tables and refused to return to the kitchens. Black women workers like Mary Smith and Elizabeth Brooks organized protests and rallies to build public support on and off of campus. As the strike wore on, many students rallied to their defense. The Black Student Movement was the first campus group to support the cafeteria workers. Noting the lag of desegregation on Southern campuses and in the South generally, black students added their own demands to those of the workers. They included the expansion of black student aid programs and black study programs. Clashes escalated between students at Lenoir Hall a few weeks later when opposing white students attacked integrated groups of students sympathetic to the strike, forcing the closure of the cafeteria hall. Governor Robert Scott ordered the National Guard on standby. Finally, the workers formed a union and won many of their demands. This benefited 5,000 other state employees as well. But a month later, the University of North Carolina administration betrayed them by contracting out the food service. Many were laid off or fired for union activities. By the end of the year, the now AFSCME organized workforce struck again over many of the same issues. When renewed student strike support was threatened, management quickly caved, and the strike ended in victory. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. So, Colorado Governor Hickenlooper today, or just yesterday, I believe it was, he came out and said during an interview with The Hill that, we're doing it to ourselves. We are the terrorists against ourselves. He says, I'm continually amazed that Washington can do so little and talk about that so much. And that's just honestly and truthfully, amazing that you can see these politicians time and time again, oh, our thoughts and prayers, oh, we got to do something, oh, on and on. And yet, massacre after massacre, nothing, zip, nada. And it just shows to me how powerful the NRA, the allure of the big money, and the power of the NRA is in this country. It's quite frightening to me that we can't even have a common sense conversation around which guns we should be having on our streets. It's just nuts to me. And here to talk a little bit about this and also the big indictments of yesterday and today, I've asked our good friend Scott Dworkin to come talk with us. Scott is the co-founder of the Democratic Coalition, also host of the upcoming Dworkin Report. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
They use my name too much. All these people are telling me you gotta use the same kind of messaging, so they want to use my last name at a constant, but it makes me cringe every time. Anyways, good to see you.
Good to see you too. So what do you think of this? What do you think of Hickenlooper's statement that we are our own enemies on this gun issue?
I mean, I think people just need to realize that a lot of people are trying to toy with us in regards to how we feel and how we perceive things. I think it's very clear that overhauling different laws is not going to help us right now. This is an emergency situation, okay? We can assume that there's an impending attack somewhere. There's going to be another mass shooting probably next week. Like, that can be assumed based on statistics. And we're doing nothing to prevent that from happening. And any of this planning, background checks, anything of the sort, it's not going to help us right now.
Right.
So maybe we need, I don't even know if this will work, but an emergency assault weapons ban. And at some point, we're going to need to take those guns out of the hands of people. I mean, there's no reason for someone to have that. I know some friends have said hunting, but you're not going to eat an animal that's riddled with bullets and gunpowder and different chemicals that make it not edible at that point. So that is another BS statement.
Add it to this, Scott. I mean, you should. I don't know if people have seen, what these bullets do to bodies, be it human or animal, but there's not much left to eat.
One of the things that I think that should be required of elected officials is a lot of these school shootings, there are CCTV cameras of the shootings. And I think they should be forced to see it. I think they should be forced to see the crime scene photos of everything, the videos of everything, the crime scene videos, and everything from Columbine leading to now. Every single shooting, every single victim, every single person, read every single person's bio and name. I mean, you got to get to the reality of it where it's not worth it. It's not worth it to have these things. And when you see something rip like shrapnel through a 5-year-old, it makes you pause, and you hope that nobody else ever has to see that or experience that. And I can tell you now that putting guns in the classrooms or selling more guns is not gonna help.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I don't disagree with your thought, but it's my view that most of these people are soulless, and that's not going to help. Because if you can look into the eyes of a grieving mother knowing that her child's been murdered at the hands of one of these guns and not react to that, I don't know that some pictures or some images are gonna do anything to your soul.
Right, and I guess I have this feeling that there's going to be a tipping point where people are going to have to fold for their own self-preservation. But I'm my hope is kind of restored a little bit, so I'm a little bit more optimistic about our future. From what I've seen, especially from Democrats, that for next week on the Hill, an assault weapons ban is going to be a very true reality of something we can do now that can make a difference. A national gun buyback program would be also a great idea for us to start implementing. But the answer is less guns on the streets. Exactly. If people want to be a responsible gun owner and get a handgun or whatever, the state laws can depend on that. But we're not protected to have missiles in our backyards, and have grenade launchers and things like that. Like nobody should have those. That's for our military to have.
Yeah, I mean, one of the people, emailed me, said, look, if you want one of those guns, if you want an assault weapon, you want an AR-15, join the military. They've got them. And guess what they do when you're not using them? They don't just leave them laying around. They lock them up. They're not just laying around the barracks for someone to just pick up and play with. They actually treat them with respect because they are dangerous weapons.
Right. And we're putting together a coalition of current and former law enforcement officials and members of the military that are supportive of an assault weapons ban. And I think they can speak to it better than anybody else because they talk about the reality. So, it's another thing where we can present them with a fact of like, let's look at the reality of the situation, not some Rambo situation, where you think that someone's going to be able to respond because, even if, as we've seen now, even if we have someone who's armed or, ready to go inside, it doesn't mean that you'll have the courage to do so. And that, who knows, that sadly could have saved lives.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I mean, they did. They had a good guy with a gun there. And you're right. He stayed outside. But here's the thing. You're talking about a guy with a sidearm up against somebody with a semi-automatic weapon. That's not really a fair fight, I don't think.
I would have gone in with a nightstick if I was the security guy because it's.
I like to believe that I would have too.
But when you're faced with that kind of decision, it's everybody on their own. I think it'd be billions of dollars to be able to pay for security officers in 98,000 public schools. If you paid them $30,000 a year. If you got firearms for everybody, the training and the cost for that, again, it comes down to money. And every single teacher that I've talked to, not one, has said that it would be in their top 100 expenditures of what they would spend money on if they had an extra 20 or 30K in their budget. It would be books and it would be, food for the kids, breakfast specifically. They were very specific about breakfast.
Yeah. You said this is an emergency situation. I've had a bunch of people email me say, well, what we need to do, this is an emergency, Rick. We need to call out the National Guard. We need to set up, like military operations at the door of every school and have someone in Kevlar vests and, the big, machine guns at every school door because we're gonna scare them off. I'm curious your thoughts of introducing that kind of militarization into our schools.
Oh, what are we fighting overseas for? Like, what are we protecting here if we can't protect ourselves? I mean, I don't think that's going to help because it's not that obviously Trump would probably use that for other things as well to try and round up people if DACA ends up expiring instead of getting extended here. He can abuse that power, and obviously he would. So that's something that would be terrifying. I don't think that also could happen. I don't think we have enough people for them to be able to cover that many different locations and secure that many locations and make sure that somebody doesn't have that sort of weapon or they haven't been holding. The key here is limiting the options available to them to inflict as much harm in the shortest amount of time possible. And one of the things to do that is to remove the weapon of choice. Because again, if there's a weapon of mass destruction like that used in a terrorist act like these are, you take away the weapon of mass destruction. You make sure that nobody else can use it because you can't trust that that's not going to be used for that intent. At the same time, if you have background checks, that doesn't mean anything when it comes down to how are they going to use that gun. You can't tell me for sure at any point that this person's not going to use it to murder someone. You can't tell me that they're not going to have a psychotic break and they're not going to go into work and shoot everybody. You can't tell me that.
Nope.
And you're never going to be able to predict it. And there's not one predictor that ever guarantees that whatsoever. And it's not worth the risk. It's just not worth it.
No, as I said from the beginning, before these people were illegal gun owners, they were legal gun owners. Before these people did something illegal, before they went and murdered people, they were legal gun owners. Look at the guy in Vegas. You look at this kid in Florida.
Right. And the Florida case is going to be something where luckily they're being called out in regards to law enforcement. They're calling themselves out. and they're being very clear and transparent with the public as to what we can see right now. So, I think that's going to help change things in regards to how they communicate and how seriously they take threats. So that may help a bit. But again, if we're selling these AR-15s, these are not meant to be in the hands of anybody that's not facing war, and it's just not. We're not fighting anybody back home like that. And you're not going to be able to, if you're going to be defending your family, you're not going to be wanting to fire that weapon in their vicinity even. I mean, there's so many different things that can go wrong. And then if you have that to defend your home with, it just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make any sense.
I'm right there with you. Let's move this because I think we're on the same page. All of the other stuff, the hardening of the schools and the background checks and the age limits and all of that stuff, in my view, are distractions from what really is the problem. And the guns, to me, are the problem. And I would argue we've already got gun control. It's just a matter of where we draw the line. So let's draw the line on this side of sanity. But what I see coming from the right wing, and very predictable, is the attacks on really the survivors and those folks who are saying, hey, look, I don't want anyone else to have to live through this. I want to get your thoughts on, as you watch this stuff roll out, what are you thinking about? And, what if it were you they were attacking like that?
Well, they have. Russia has attacked me a lot, and so has Trump and his cronies and people, on the right-wing news media. But I don't want to sound like a Looney Tune when it comes out. But it's to be expected. It's exactly what I would expect from them. Immediately after the shooting happened, I know that via the Hamilton website, Russian bots were pushing both sides of the issue on gun reform, gun control, and they were trying to wedge how we were going to talk about it. When we changed the issue from gun control to gun reform, because gun control is a loaded issue, the Russian bots started pushing gun control. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is there was Russian interference immediately after the shooting, like immediately after. And then that was coupled with members of Congress and Republicans starting to speak out against it, combined with this conspiracy theory about actors, which they're still talking about, and a lot of people are now questioning whether or not they're actors because it's what they're talking about, and it's not good.
Are you surprised the president's son, not the brightest bulb in the box, but are you surprised that he retweeted into that kind of nonsense?
No, I'm guessing that it was coordinated. I don't assume that. From what we've seen, there are mistakes made, but they're not that stupid because they would have been caught already with most of the crimes they've committed.
It's just remarkable to me that we see this time and time again. And as you point out, sadly, there's potentially going to be another one next week. Because just a couple of days ago, in fact, a friend of mine, his sister was in a school where a kid brought a gun to school, had destructive devices in his bag with a bunch of ammunition. He ended up shooting himself. But this is a 7th grader. And I keep coming back to, when are we going to, as a country, collectively wake up and go, 1, a 7th grader shouldn't have access to a weapon. 2, why aren't we locking up whoever's gun it is? And 3, when are we going to start really talking about how we get these guns out of the hands of people who are going to do harm to all of our children and to us? It's nuts to me.
It's crazy, and it's going to get, I would assume, worse before it gets better. But I think, again, what we're looking at is a revolution of sorts where people are finally looking at what we never wanted to look at. We didn't want to look at gun control, women's rights. We didn't want to look at, DACA. We didn't want to, we really didn't want to confront the major issues that we had. We tried, but with the divisive tactics that they've used, it's made it nearly impossible. So they've won every battle because they stall, and then we have to fight for what's left.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I'm proud as hell of those kids in Florida for not for standing up and not taking it. And I'll tell you, I have some great hope for the future. And I tweeted out, the other day that I said, this is the beginning of the next greatest generation, because these kids are articulate and they're not ideological. They know what they want, and they seem to be moving in that direction, regardless of what the radical right keeps saying about it actually not happening.
They grew up with a great president named Barack Obama, and I think he taught them well. He's one of many progressive leaders that I think that growing up between 8 and 16 or whatever, 10 and 18, he's had a major influence on that. And I've seen a lot of people, a lot of the survivors that I've spoken with, it's not, and they want to make it clear, it's not political, and it's not something that they've experienced. And I know for a fact a lot of them are in shock right now, and so they're able to speak out, and they're using that as their grief sets in. The reality sets in of some of them don't want to leave the house. Yeah. Some of them are scared to be alone. Some of them can't, one of them has to sleep on the foot of a parent's bed, because she's terrified to sleep or be alone at any point. These people these are kids, remember that. And when it's setting in now, these people, it can hurt a lot of people over time.
Yeah, the trauma is going to be there. I mean, because look, I've seen people shot, I've seen people stabbed, beaten, all of that, and it stays with you. The image. I still remember the guy that I saw get shot laying on the ground with his life bubbling out of his chest. That is an image that I will never forget. I can't imagine being 15, 16, 17 years old and having to see my friends massacred like that. I just can't imagine the trauma that those kids are going through.
It's a terrifying situation. And, as you hear just the little things, it kind of brings you hope and light with things, where people stand in front of the other people, taking bullets. So there's some bright spots in this awful terrorist attack. But it's got a long road here. And I think the good news here is, with a lot of different incidents across the country, I think this is going to become the norm. So not just in Parkland, but wherever it happens next, I'm guessing the students are going to respond the same way, and it's going to be stronger or the same level. And I don't think that's going to change. This is going to become the norm.
Yeah, and those kids vote this. A lot of them vote this November. Let me change topics for a second. Yesterday, indictments. Today, more indictments. And Rick Gates pleading guilty, I guess, to 2 charges that could net him up to 10 years in prison. What are your thoughts on them?
He's one of the more senior guys that Trump's ever had in his political circle. He's one of the most senior guys and trusted right-hand man of Manafort's. This is not a person that they would have ever planned to flip. If you asked him a year ago if that would be even possible, I bet that none of them would consider it. But now I believe we're at 19 different people indicted, 13 Russians and then 6 here in the States. And 4 of them were senior, very, very senior in regards to the Trump campaign. And the writing is kind of on the wall, because every single one of these informants people would flip have a different time span that they fill in the blanks. And they're kind of the only people who can fill in the blanks for different things. So Manafort on how the campaign started, how they chose Pence's VP, why they chose Pence's VP, why they chose to remove things from the RNC, their platform. These different simple questions that they have are all going to be answered. And so they're going to know those answers. And as they dig in on Manafort's going to make that choice. Is he going to stay silent? Or maybe Mueller has enough evidence already where he can present that to Manafort and say you flip or you spend the rest of your life in prison. So as of right now, I don't think that Trump ever expected it to be this far, this quick. And I think he's still catching up to that. I don't think that he thinks he's going to get in trouble. Republicans on the Hill have said that there is absolutely no possibility that they will let him pardon anyone. They're scared of a massacre in the House if they were to do that or allow it to happen. because that's just crossing a line that most of them don't even find acceptable. They'll actually side with the people over their party.
Well, as they should. I mean, at this point, they should be siding with the people over their party anyway, because it's seeming more and more the evidence is becoming more overwhelming. And I got to be honest, I loved Manafort's statement when the Gates story came out. He said, "I had hoped and expected my business colleague would have had the strength to continue to battle to prove our innocence." And that's, kind of like I would have never imagined him to turn on me. So the question I keep coming back to, at what point does Manafort realize that he's going to be the odd man out and try and cut himself the best deal? Because, as you've said, he could spend the rest of his life behind bars.
Yeah, it's really I don't know what's going to happen next. I would assume that we're going to be focusing on what's domestic, so things that happen here, and also expose probably more troll farms in Russia. Because there were larger networks that were attacking us, and there were networks that were closer to the Russian government that were attacking us. So I would assume that they have that route as well. But everything is kind of playing out how we would assume it. So if we I would assume maybe a week Manafort would flip, and then I'll say it again. I said this last week. If maybe 2 weeks. And Trump would have to resign, because they're going to ask him about everything. They're not going to want just smidgens of information. They're going to want a download of every business deal they've ever done, everything he knows about Trump inside and out. And that's 38 years of dirty laundry. That's 38 years of Fred Trump and their business partnership and his dad's business partnership and what their brothers have done together, and what they've done internationally. And so there's going to be a very large amount of information. And at the same time, if you saw some of these indictments, they made it clear that they had his emails, and Paul Manafort had no idea they had them. And they're personal emails, and it was supposed to be a private, hidden, encrypted, la-di-da, but they had them. And, I think that's going to scare a lot of people as well. If I'm Don Jr. and Kushner right now, I am either making a deal with Mueller or I'm not in the country any longer. Like that, that's how I would think, that, because I just don't see them wanting to stick around, because those are the people less likely to flip or even want to flip. Those are the people he wants to make an example out of, I would assume. Do
you think that's a big part of the reason why Kushner can't get a security clearance?
I think, his business dealings in general, but I think, for the most part, he was knowingly an agent of Russia, where he, but they don't see it defined as that. They see they're helping their friends because they've been friends with people in Russia for, over a decade. And they spend weekends with oligarchs, on yachts. And it's just like, that's their normal. So they think it's okay, even if they're sanctioned or if they're involved with a terrorist attack on the United States. It's not all right. It's the same idea as if they were hanging out with Osama bin Laden after 9/11. Like that, it's the same kind of type. If you're hanging out with Putin and giving him fist bumps, that is how we need to think about it. They harmed our infrastructure. Like they could probably hack into our power systems. They could probably hack into our water supply. They can probably turn off hospitals and airports. And not be able to leave a trace on it. I mean, there's a lot of things that people can do when they hack into computers. Not only stealing our information, our money, our security, private information, photos, videos, that kind of thing. And so we need to be able to protect ourselves. So this is beyond just voting and everything else. And so thankfully, we have Mueller. He's taking it seriously. He's accelerated things to a point here where there's only a few outcomes here. And I think that what's going to happen here is Manafort's going to flip, and then it's going to be over for Trump. I don't see him making it any further, because as they get information from Manafort, I'm assuming that will come out to the public eye.
Wow. So Manafort's the key. Over the next couple of days, last line of questioning, what are you paying attention to? What are you looking for? What are you expecting?
In the Russia?
Yep.
I would assume that we're gonna see some indictments at the level of Russia, but for the United States, the coordination factor. So we're going to see people that we may not have been exposed to before, or as much so, or we haven't heard in a while, start to come into fold. And they're going to talk about sanctions. That'll be one of the key issues. And then so that'll involve Don Jr., Kushner, Manafort. So there's probably, again, more charges potentially for Manafort because there's still the meeting charges, more conspiracy charges, more money laundering charges. And they're only at like 100 million and counting. So I would keep an eye on, I wouldn't be surprised if this is the week where it's Don Jr. and Kushner going down. I don't think that it would be at the same time. I think it would be spread out. And I think it would be Kushner first because he's the most imminent danger to the United States of America as this moment, because he does have clearance enough to see private documents and then share them. He has the ability to share them. You're not supposed to. But that's one of the things that's available to him. And we need to be aware that that's a danger to everybody. So I think Kushner might be next, and I think it might be next week.
Yeah, that'll be something huge. Because I think you're probably right. I think they'll go after Kushner first because he's a little bit smarter than Junior and doesn't have quite the loyalty that Junior has.
Yeah, he knows how to cover his tracks like his criminal father.
We shall see. Scott, great talk with you. I appreciate the time and the thoughts. And as this continues, we want to have you back to keep us up to date.
Always. See you next week.
Good stuff. Thanks so much, Scott Dworkin. Check out his work. You can follow him on Twitter @Funder. Also, the Democratic Coalition. Check out their work there. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History 2. This day in Labor History was 1875. That was the day the National Marine Engineers Association was founded at a meeting in Cleveland, Ohio. The association represented steamboat engineers, most from boats navigating the Great Lakes. Being a steamboat engineer was risky business. Boilers could explode, fires could start on board, vessels could sink. Crews often had little training, and engineers that complained about the unsafe conditions or got caught talking union could lose their place on a ship. One history of the Great Lakes described the role of the engineer, writing, "Down in the bowels of the vessel, he controls not only the propulsion, but the steering, lighting, pumping, anchoring, and ventilation of the modern marine structure. And on the great warship, he is even responsible for the maneuvering of the heavy guns." In 1854, the engineers in Buffalo banded together in an association of their own. And in the next 2 decades, other cities followed. But the engineers knew that the only way to have real power to change their working conditions was to form a national organization. 10 delegates from Buffalo, Cleveland, Chicago, Detroit, and Baltimore attended the founding meeting. One of the union's early causes was to stop American shipping companies from hiring foreign engineers in international waters. In 1884, Congress passed a bill requiring officers on American ships to be U.S. citizens. The union grew to more than 20,000 members by the end of World War I. But the union fell on hard times during the Great Depression, losing more than 75% of its membership. In an effort to shore up U.S. shipping, Congress passed the Merchant Marine Act in 1936, calling for the construction of 500 new ships. Today, the union is part of the AFL-CIO under the name Marine Engineers Beneficial Association. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Jeff Siegel, the Mad Writer, tweeted back at us, how about removing all the metal detectors from Congress and instead have the legislators do what school children do? Practice lockdown procedures for an active shooter. How about we go one step farther, Jeff? how about we do what the crazy right wing is saying that we should be teaching our kids, and that's to teach our kids to gang rush a shooter. You cannot make this up. This Megan McArdle wrote that in the conservative Daily Beast, now at the Washington Post, she wrote, "I'd like to see us encourage people to gang rush shooters rather than allowing their instincts to hide. If we drill it into young people that the correct thing to do is for everyone to instantly run at the guy with the gun, these sorts of mass shootings would be less deadly." Really? I got an idea. How about we all get behind you and rush the shooter? I love all of this hero BS. You don't know what you're going to do. And like Scott said, if I had a club, I'd go in. You hope you would. Sitting in the safety of your home or sitting somewhere safe, I would love to believe that I would do that. That I would run into a building with a nightstick with somebody who's got a semi-automatic weapon. Don't know that I would or not. I have seen active shooting, and to be honest, I watched. I took cover and I watched, followed the guy. I didn't attempt to jump him. I didn't have a gun. I know, but Rick, if I had one, the cop would have shot me when he pulled up. Because now you add another element to this. And this hero mentality is just really teach kids to rush the gunman. Okay, everybody get into a big while he's got a gun that's got 90 bullets in it. Let's get everyone in the class and run because he can't shoot all of us. Or we can hold the ones up in front. They're going to get killed anyway. We'll sacrifice little Jimmy for the good of the rest of us. I read this heartbreaking story. In fact, my wife sent it to me about this teacher in a wheelchair who was, really thinking this through and heartbroken, over the idea that, there'd be very little that she could do. And, it came up during the class and, long story short, she said, I don't know what I can do. And they said, all the kids, and these are young kids saying, well, we've already talked about it. We would carry you out of here. This is what our kids are thinking about. This is the kind of stuff that's happening in our schools, and we still are protecting these gun nuts. And we come up with just the dumbest ideas. The gun is the problem. Stop with everything else. I love the people who say, what we need to do, Rick, is we need to get teachers. We need to get them with guns. Because, every school has got a crazy gun nut there. Give them a Kevlar vest and an AK and send them into school. And I go, whatever happens when the teacher gets, frustrated and flips out and starts shooting kids? Or, a kid knows where the gun is. Study after study has shown, and you can look it up yourself. Wherever there's a gun, there's trouble. It's that simple. Now, there's also the idea that what we need to do is we need to make our schools more like prisons than they already are. When I went to school, and I know this is going back a million years into the middle 80s, you could walk in and out of the school. The doors were open. When school was open, you could walk in and out of any door. They didn't have one main door that you had to walk through. Students could come and go through several entrances. Now we've already locked it down to where, you can't even, where my kids go to school, you can get in one door. That's it. And then you have to be buzzed into all the other ones. Which is sane in this day and age. It's rational in this day and age. But this is how far we've gone as a society. This is how extreme we have become as a society. And I would argue the guns play a huge part of this. But what they're saying is we need to set up a fenced perimeter and we need to have guards and dogs and, basically turning it into even more of a prison. Which, again, isn't going to stop anything with someone who's completely and totally motivated. There's also the push to continue to punish people with mental illness. And look, I don't want crazy people to have guns either. But not every person who has a mental illness is someone who should be abused or mocked or any of that at a time when mental illness is a serious problem in this country. There are those who are advocating bringing back psychiatric hospitals so that we can incarcerate people who are struggling with mental illness. And if we hadn't already seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I would highly suggest it, because the conditions are horrible. And that's what people are saying we should be going back to. Let's go back to the good old days of the 1950s. And look, there's a segment of our population who wants us to go back there anyway. But you look at these horrible ideas, one right after the other, and where do they come from? All NRA talking points. And what are they meant to do? They're meant to distract us from the real issue, which is too many of these damn guns. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. President Trump is telling Mexico to crack down on the flow of Central American migrants into the United States, citing the threat posed by MS-13 gang members from El Salvador. Trump tweeted Friday that, quote, MS-13 gang members are being removed by our great ICE and Border Patrol agents by the thousands, but these killers come back in from El Salvador and through Mexico like water. Trump has been dialing up the fear factor over MS-13 a lot in recent months, including in his State of the Union address.
For decades, open borders have allowed drugs and gangs to pour into our most vulnerable communities. Tonight, I am calling on Congress to finally close the deadly loopholes that have allowed MS-13 and other criminal gangs to break into our country.
His solution to the MS-13 problem? To build a U.S.-Mexico border wall. But there's reason to suspect that approach would have little effect. Of the hundreds of thousands of immigrants detained by U.S. Customs and Border Patrol since 2011, just 0.02% are believed to have ties to criminal organizations in their home countries. According to FBI estimates, MS-13 comprises less than 1% of all gang activity in the United States. And the new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, Israel, will open on May 14th of this year, considerably earlier than many anticipated. According to reporting by Israeli reporter Barak Ravid, the facility that opens this year will be a temporary one manned by a small staff until the location of a permanent embassy is chosen and construction wraps up. The May 14th embassy opening this year is timed to coincide with the 70th anniversary of Israel's independence. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
Change. The Rick Smith Show.
Day is new, and everyone is waiting on you. And you got time.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So Noah Smith over at Bloomberg has a piece out. He's saying that, look, small business, the optimism, small business, all-time high. The idea that the economy's doing great. We've bought it hook, line, and sinker. We're unemployment's low. It's in fact, I think they said it's the lowest it's been in decades. The idea being that with unemployment low, the job market tight, wages should go up. And he goes through a couple of explanations on why he thinks that it's not happening, and citing some research of these couple of economists, and he says, look, it's basic economic theory, basic supply and demand that every one of us learned taking economics. Tighter labor markets, real wages should go up. Why is it not working? He said one possible reason is that employers are growing increasingly powerful, and as you see this concentration in the labor market, There's a decreased number of employers, and they are suppressing the wages. Now, I took exception with that. I go, okay, that's fine. We've seen these scenarios before. When you had a stronger labor movement, you could have some balance and you could force them to give better wages, defined benefits for pensions, and decent health care. They also go on to say that the reality is with this them holding down the wages, it's breaking the model that economists have thought of for years, that raising the minimum wage would not cost any jobs. And I've said for years, an increase in minimum wage, if it's a reasonable wage. Some people say, let's make it $100 an hour. Why don't you? I go, nobody's talking about that. People are talking about how do we make sure that people can afford to live? Which is why I don't think a $12 or $15 minimum wage on giant corporations is a burdensome thing. But this is what he points out, that it's exactly what a lot of researchers are saying, that it's not going to kick a bunch of people out of their work. His second possibility is that the lower unemployment is making people less productive. And this is one that I don't think anybody's really buying, but he's throwing it off. He's saying that, when there was the threat of you losing your job, you were buckling down and you were working harder. And now that you're not, you're less productive, and the employer is kind of going, well, just be happy you have a job. I'm not quite sure I get that one. And he said the third possibility is simply caution after a long, deep recession. Nominal wages, wage cuts are very rare. In econ jargon, wages are sticky downward. So it's just a structural thing that eventually they're going to kick back up. And I keep going, okay, well, when's that going to happen? And the fear is, and this is one of those things that, these cycles happen. Wages get stuck, the economy recovers, and then it's a slow pulling up of the wages. And when we had a stronger labor movement, we pushed those wages up faster. My fear is that the next recession that Trump causes, the wages are just going to remain stagnant and continue to decline. And I'd argue that's what's been happening over the last 20 years. The last time I remember when you could say that the invisible hand, the market was actually working, was during the Clinton years, when we had really tight labor markets and they were paying like $10 an hour for people working at McDonald's back in the 90s. And I actually remember that. There was the McDonald's that we used to go to occasionally that they were making $10 an hour, and they didn't have high school kids working in them. They had actual, people who were making a living doing that. And that was back when the minimum wage was still, $5 and a quarter, I think it was. So you're talking almost double the minimum wage to work at McDonald's because the labor market was that tight. And then, of course, the Republicans, along with the help of Bill Clinton, passed welfare reform, which pushed a whole bunch more people into the workforce, especially at the lower end, and down it went, and gone were those jobs at $10 an hour, back to minimum wage. And every time we use the legislative process to help push wages upward, our Republican friends, with the help of conservative Democrats, figure out a way to screw that up. Which is why, again, I keep coming back to, and why I'm such an advocate for organized labor, is that when you have the ability to bargain on the job, on the site, right there, when you look at the books and the profit that your wealth is creating, you get a fair share of that. Market forces be damned. All of the invisible gimmickry and hand and all of that nonsense out the window. Your wealth creating more wealth, you should share in that. That's sane, that's rational. And if that were the case, we wouldn't have the scenarios we are now, because you hear Donald Trump all the time. Our companies have never been more profitable. They've never done much better. They've never been better. Stocks are through the roof. Wall Street's great. Everything's fabulous and fantastic. And yet, wages are stuck where they are. And why? As I've said, comes back, for me anyway, back to bargaining power, or the lack thereof. Anyway, if you've missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. For those listening on stations that only pick up hour one, head on over to thericksmithshow.com for hour two. Everyone else, stick around. We're right back. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
No matter how hard you try, you can't stop us now.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Since the prehistoric ages, and the days of ancient Greece, walked down through the Middle Ages, planet Earth kept going through changes, and then the Renaissance came, and times continue to change. Nothing stayed the same.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So Saturday, tomorrow, the big day all across the country, workers out in the streets, one protesting the fact that the Supreme Court's going to, in my view, going to just bludgeon public sector workers with a judicial activist move in the Supreme Court to impose the no rights at work agenda for public sector workers all across the country. And two, they're going to be out in the streets to show that their power to say, look, we've got to get this system, we've got to get this economy working for all of us. And if you look at the reality, union workers do much better than non-union workers, even as numbers have diminished. And it's not even close. The reality is unionized women do much better than non-unionized women. Minorities do much better than non-union minorities. It's just the reality. And here to talk about the big day of action tomorrow and also what we can expect in the post-Janus era, I've asked Barbara Maynard to come talk with us. She's a founding partner of Act Now Strategies. Barbara, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me on, Rick.
So tomorrow, all across the country, big day of action. What are we expecting?
Well, we're expecting workers across America to rise up and demand an end to these corporate attacks, this alt-right attack that really has escalated under President Donald Trump, of course. And, these are dire times for labor, but as we're seeing on other issues, when we look at how children are rising up and demanding gun control and all of these things, women are rising up with the Me Too movement. I think we're seeing the same thing here with the workers, that the workers are saying enough is enough. We need to have a voice in the workplace, and we're not going to accept these kind of attacks. And what does that mean? Well, frankly, it is probably pretty likely that the U.S. Supreme Court is going to rule in favor of the national right to work movement. And so what we are looking at doing is radically changing the way that unions really talk to their members. And it's time for change. And workers are rising up, and we're not going to allow this to be the end of the labor movement.
Yeah, I've been saying, pretty much my entire working career, and I've been a union member for over 25 years. I've always wanted to see a much more militant movement. I've always said I'd love union members, to hold their union card the way a lot of my NRA friends hold their NRA cards. That kind of the militancy, that kind of we're going to fight and we're going to win better, wages, hours, conditions, all that down the line. And maybe to me, this is the beginning of that.
I'm really hopeful that it actually is, believe it or not. I know myself, I work with unions all across the country now, and I spent the last week sitting in a conference in Phoenix, Arizona, listening to how the private sector is talking to their customers. Well, the unions need to understand that their members need that same kind of conversation. We need to get away from the old school approach of how we talk to the union member, and we need to really retool, and we need to talk to members where they are. And there's a lot of things that can be done, and I think this crisis really is a wake-up call to every union and every worker in America that we're not going to allow the alt-right, the Koch brothers, the DeVoses, the Waltons, or any of them to run over us and steal our rights. And so I think we're looking at an entirely new era. So I really think that this is going to backfire. I think you're going to end up with more militant workers. Just like you're saying, Rick, you wish that people would flash their union card with pride. I think you're going to start to see that. You're going to start to see that just like you have with the women saying very proudly, I am a woman and you can't abuse me. I am a high school student and you can't bring a gun into my classroom. All of these things. We've really crossed the line. Enough is enough. We are rising up, and we're not going to back down.
Yeah, and I would argue it's about time. And, with the Me Too movement, one of the things I've been saying for years is that if you wanted to end workplace harassment, the best way, in my view, to do that is to join a union. You file a grievance. You pursue all legal recourse through your union to make it stop. And sadly, and I've been part of this where, women have just said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I'm hoping now, moving forward, that ends.
You know, the best protection that women have against not only abuse in the workplace, but also pay discrimination is to have a union contract and to have the union backing up. You know, and I have been contacted myself. The reason I got into the labor movement in the first place is because I was not in a union. And time again, I actually did suffer workplace harassment and abuse and discrimination. And I didn't have any recourse. And that flipped a switch in me and said, I need to fight for workers. And the only protection that workers can have is what I never did have personally, which is a labor union.
Yeah.
And we're not going to back down.
So as someone who does this kind of messaging for a living, as someone who does this, how do you begin to tell those stories? Because I've been saying for years, labor stopped telling their story. I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. It was that union card that got me out of poverty, and now my family lives in a neighborhood with doctors and lawyers, and we do okay. These stories have to be continually and repetitively told, and I think labor has done a poor job of that over the last 20 years.
Well, I think labor has done a poor job of telling those stories, of lifting people out of poverty, and we need to tell those stories. We need to do it better, and most importantly, we need to do it in the ways that people now consume information. But it's not just about that. What moves people these days is not just those detailed stories. You know, join a union, you'll double your wages, or whatever those stories are. Join the union, you'll get affordable health care. But it's about creating an experience for the worker that they can feel good about. They want to feel good about the organization that they are a part of. And so it's recreating that experience and going back to the olden days where, you know, the unions really worked hard to create that experience and be a family. You know, we see this with the firefighters union. I talk about an incredible experience that firefighters have with those unions. When somebody's killed in line of duty, they are swarmed with the union. The union comes in and takes care of every little detail for that family. Nothing is left behind. They are there within hours. And that's the kind of service we need to start providing again to the union member. You saw it in Detroit in the old, you know, the height of the auto area. You still see it with the longshoremen that work on the docks. The ILA and the ILW is very strong at creating that community. But I think some of our bigger unions have gotten away from that, and we need to find that again. We need to figure out a way to create that community to make people feel good about their union. So they say, you know, that's something that I need, not just for me as a worker, but I need the union for my family, and I'm a part of a community. And so we need to create new communities, and we need to really tell these stories better. We need to share it, and we need to really say, the union's my family. Those of us who are activists, we believe strongly in the union family, but most people have gotten very disconnected from that, and we need to make those connections again for people.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And do you think it's that we've gotten away from, some of the larger unions have gotten away from craft unionism? I mean, you know, as a truck driver, I was a Teamster for years, and you know, my Teamster brothers and sisters, you know, something happens to them, we're always right there. And the same thing with electrical workers and down the line. Do you think that, you know, some of that is the fact that, you know, some unions represent a whole bunch of different types of workers, and they're not as industry focused as maybe in the past?
So I think there's a number of challenges that face today's unions, and I think that is definitely an issue. When, you know, when we see, you know, frankly, you know, I work with the Teamsters, and there just aren't as many shops that they can organize anymore because these large conglomerates have come in, like XPO Logistics, that make it so incredibly hard. They've got a fleet of union busters who come in and make it very hard to organize. And so in order to maintain their power, you know, and their, if you will, the apparatus to be able to continue to represent workers, they have diversified. You know, we've got Teamsters Local 1932 in California that represents you know, large number of public sector workers now, and there's UC workers, University of California workers, and across America you're seeing this. And, you know, it's the way that it is. And so rather than look back and say, we need to go back to those kind of craft unions because I think that train's left the station, let's figure out how to do well with what we have today. Let's not look back so much, but let's figure this out. And I think that it's really the way that you know, all of the unions need to look at it, and organizations and even private sector companies are saying we need to segment the workforce. We need to understand how people really receive their information, what they respond to. This is information that's out there. We know that to a certain extent. It's a little scary, artificial intelligence, but we know, and that's the kind of things that I'm looking at and my company is looking at, is how can we change the union message and really curate that union experience so that we don't look at a group of people. I mean, not even every truck driver is the same. Now, it used to be that the Teamsters represented a lot of white workers, for example, white men, and now we've got women driving trucks, and we've got Latino drivers and African American drivers, and how they consume information and make decisions is all very different. That's real life. That's how things work. So we're looking at radically changing the communications patterns of unions in America.
And look, I think it's a good thing. I just wish it weren't under these circumstances. I look at this case that they're going to hear oral arguments for on Monday, and it's, honestly and truthfully, it's solely about defunding and destroying organized labor. It's not about anyone's rights. It's not about anyone's free speech. It's about none of that. It's simply very Machiavellian politics, in my view.
It really is. I mean, the truth of the matter is that right to work is an absolute lie. And so we've actually launched a project called the Right to Unite in an effort to debunk the right to work lie. And we're encouraging unions across America to stop even saying the words right to work. That's their phrase. They invented that in order to try to destroy unions. And so we need to say, call it what it is. Just call it the right to work lie from now on. And let's talk about the right to unite. We do have the right to unite as Americans. We have the right to bargain collectively. We have the right to come together and back up people of color when they're discriminated against in the workplace, or women when they're harassed in the workplace, or whatever the case may be, because that's not going to stop. That's just the nature of corporate greed, is that people are going to be exploited and taken advantage of whenever they can. And so we have got to unite, and it is our right to unite. And so, maybe as soon as the oral arguments are done and the Supreme Court issues the opinion and fair share fees are obliterated in the public sector side, we need to stand up even stronger than ever and say, we have the right to unite. We are going to unite. And we're not going to put up with freeloaders in the workplace, because they're still going to get the benefits of the union without paying their fees. And so we need to look at every single one of our coworkers in the eye and say, really, are you going to freeload off me? Don't put up with it for a moment.
No,
that's what fighting back is all about.
No, you're absolutely right. I remember we had some Beck objectors when the last place I worked at, and a lot of people gave them their opinion.
Yep, that's what needs to happen. It needs to happen in the workplace. It needs to happen from the bottom up. We need to be saying this from the pulpits, that we will not accept. It's immoral to be a freeloader. We need to be saying it from the level of our senior leadership in these unions, saying that, we won't accept freeloaders. We're going after you. We need to change the way we're communicating. We need to do everything we can to shore up our collective bargaining agreements, and we need to continue to fight every time there's an opportunity for an election, like the midterms, like the next presidential election, to make sure that laws are made to protect workers.
Yeah, I mean, because I've been asking, are we at another one of these moments in history? I mean, when the Knights of Labor went by the wayside, when the IWW went, and something new sprang up. There was a new idea, a new way of doing things, but still based on the old ideas of an injury to one is an injury to all. That we're all in this together. Whatever the cliche you want to use, and I've been looking around saying, what's next. And what's the messaging? And this seems to me to be the beginning of that next conversation. The idea of we have the right to unite, we have the right to fight for better wages, hours, conditions, and not just on the job, but in society.
Absolutely. I think across America, whether it's the labor movement, whether it's the Me Too movement, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whatever. There's so many areas. I can't even count them. So many different areas where Americans are sort of congealing around critical core values. And this is one of ours. And this is it. And I think we are on the precipice of, yes, it's scary. And yes, we're facing a new day. And yes, we wish it didn't have to be this way. But it is this way. This is what happened. And damn it, we're going to use it as an opportunity to spring forward and create something even better and perhaps more modern than it has been. I mean, there's been a lot of attacks on the labor movement, saying that, these unions are old, these unions are stodgy, they're our grandfather's union. Well, some of that's true and some of it's not, but there is a grain of truth in there, and I see that day to day in my own work. And every union that I work with, many of which are rather stodgy, are saying, Barb, we need to talk about these new ideas because anything we've done in the past, we need to be open to change. And I'm hearing that, and it is so heartening because change is necessary. This is a new day, and we can't continue to act as we have. We cannot take a single member for granted ever again. Ever again.
Oh, and I like the idea of going back to the idea of community and the experience, and because look, I talk about my experience in my life, growing up in the 70s. The unions were in the neighborhood. They sponsored the local Little League. They were there at Christmas and Thanksgiving handing out turkeys and hams, and they were part of the community, and you knew who they were, and you knew that when someone got one of those jobs and became a member, that their lives got immediately better. Those, to me, that's the core messaging.
You couldn't be more right. The difference between now and the time you were growing up in a union is that people define community differently now, right? Because they're hiding behind their phones to a certain extent. Their time is very limited. Everybody's running around like a chicken with their head cut off, busy running after their kids, going to work, playing sports, whatever it is that they're doing. And so we can't, some of those let's say those 70s and 80s approaches are more difficult now. But the good news is there's information on what people are interested in. That information is out there. And, everybody else is using that information. Certainly everybody I was at conference with this week is using that information. All of these corporate PR people, well, we need to start using that information, and we need to understand that one person's community may be revolving around AYSO. Another person's community may revolve around volunteering at the animal shelter. Those are two very different worlds, right? Yeah. So let's figure out. Let's look at our membership, and let's think about how do we talk to everybody. And maybe one global message on those community issues doesn't really apply anymore. And maybe that's why people think that we're not so relevant anymore. And so, many of the unions actually choose what community-based organizations they get involved with on a power mapping analysis in order to figure out how to impact legislators and how to impact the local mayor, whatever the case may be. That continues to be important, but that cannot be the sole thing that the unions do. The unions need to think about, okay, on the one hand, how do we pick the right organizations in order to properly influence and demonstrate power to the elected officials who make policies that impact the workers, but also, on the other hand, how do we choose organizations and programs, and where do we put our donations should be focused on what the members are interested in. We need to think about those members far more than we have been.
Yeah, I absolutely
that's
agree.
That's how we're gonna recruit them, and that's how we're gonna retain them.
Yeah, and as I've said, maybe this is going to be a good thing. I've actually had some people saying, this could be a good thing, Rick. It could get people more active and engaged. And everyone points me to AFGE, who has an extraordinarily high membership rate. I know there are some places that have 100% membership in a union that you don't have to join. They already have no rights at work.
Right. That's exactly right. So, we're in for some pretty disruptive times, but disruption often causes monumental change. And we're preparing for that.
Yep, I'm ready to go back to the streets. I'm ready to start marching. I think we're going to see a lot of that in the coming years. And as it happens, I would love to have you come back and share your thoughts and what's going on, because I know you guys do some terrific work there.
Well, thank you. I'd be more than happy to come on anytime you want me. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Barbara. Barbara Maynard, founding partner of Act Now Strategies. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
The Tories are gone, but there's no improvement. Never cross a picket line. Now where is the might of the Labour movement? Never cross a picket line. You must never cross a picket line.
I'm Rick Smith, And this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1969. That was the day black food workers went on strike at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Their strike intersected many points central to the social upheaval of the period, including the rights of public sector workers. Besides extremely low wages, workers complained of racial abuse and discrimination on the job. When the administration ignored their demands, the cafeteria workers sat down at the tables and refused to return to the kitchens. Black women workers like Mary Smith and Elizabeth Brooks organized protests and rallies to build public support on and off of campus. As the strike wore on, many students rallied to their defense. The Black Student Movement was the first campus group to support the cafeteria workers. Noting the lag of desegregation on Southern campuses and in the South generally, black students added their own demands to those of the workers. They included the expansion of black student aid programs and black study programs. Clashes escalated between students at Lenoir Hall a few weeks later when opposing white students attacked integrated groups of students sympathetic to the strike, forcing the closure of the cafeteria hall. Governor Robert Scott ordered the National Guard on standby. Finally, the workers formed a union and won many of their demands. This benefited 5,000 other state employees as well. But a month later, the University of North Carolina administration betrayed them by contracting out the food service. Many were laid off or fired for union activities. By the end of the year, the now AFSCME organized workforce struck again over many of the same issues. When renewed student strike support was threatened, management quickly caved, and the strike ended in victory. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
It's not enough.
So the governor of Maine, Paul LePage, again, you know, it's about the ideology. It's not about the actual getting something done. It's not about good governance. It's not about best policy. It's about pure and simple hatred of government. But his administration is planning to outsource part of the Medicaid application process to a company in Massachusetts. And again, you got to wonder, what were the payouts? Whose palm got greased? Because understand, the state government does it much cheaper and much better. And this is, you know, the fact of the matter is much better and much cheaper than this company will. And, you know, again, you know, it comes back to the ideology over good governance. And understand, you've got Republicans in D.C. who want to do the same thing. They want to outsource as much as they can. The VA is on the chopping block all the time, which is why you hear so many attacks on it. But, you know, it got me thinking that, you know, Maine is an interesting state in that you've got a crazy governor and a crazy political class, but yet the people there aren't as crazy. In fact, they just got enough signatures on a petition to get a vote on universal home care for people in Maine. The idea is that they're going to raise taxes on the very wealthy people, and they define that by, they would have, I think it's like a 3% tax on anyone, on every dollar over the Medicare number. So if you pay Medicare up to, I think it's $118,800 right now. If you make less than $118,800 in Maine, you would pay nothing more. But they were going to add a state tax on top of the Medicare tax over the maximum. So those people who are fortunate enough to have paid every dime they're ever going to pay into Medicare at lunchtime on January 1st, they would have to pay for the rest of the year like everybody else. And they want to raise $310 million a year so that they can have this universal home care. Because look, you've got elderly folks who don't have the ability to go to nursing homes. And I don't know if you've noticed, nursing homes are really, really expensive. You know, in fact, you know, I have an uncle his wife was in a nursing home for a couple of years and drained almost every penny that he had. $110,000 a year, I think is what he was paying. And you go, how is that possible? Who can possibly save that kind of money? So what they're saying is, look, we want to have a system where there's a safety net for the elderly and a safety net for the disabled. Because, hey, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know if you walk out across the street and get hit by a car and end up disabled and your family can't take care of you. So they're saying, we're going to give a chance to do that. Now, other states have done it on a certain level. Hawaii has, I think they passed a law providing like $70 a day for people who have a full-time job and need to care for a loved one who's over 60. I think Washington State is considering a law to increase its payroll tax to give family members to stay home and care for loved ones $100 a day. But again, that's not putting people into nursing care, which is wildly expensive. And I would argue we've already got kind of a universal home care when you look at Medicaid, because our Medicaid is what basically is the safety net for seniors. But I think this is a great idea. I think again, it comes down to what we the people want. And I think, as Barbara was pointing out, there's all of this organizing going on, all of this tension happening. Because look, people are working harder and harder and longer for less. Wages have been stagnant for too long. And even as you watch the news and you watch someone like Trump saying, Wall Street's never been fatter or happier, it's not trickling down to Main Street. Most working people I know are struggling paycheck to paycheck. And health care is part of the killer. Which is why I find it interesting that the Center for American Progress, they have come out with a new idea. It's called Medicare Extra for All. That's their idea. We're going to make sure that there's a way to buy into it. Now understand, this is huge for the Center for American Progress to do this because look, they were all in on the ACA. In fact, I know, and I've talked to a number of their senior fellows who were very intimately involved in the ACA fight. So for them to take this kind of an approach is kind of interesting. And it's one of those things that makes you go, okay, maybe there's some stepping away from the ACA. What they're talking about doing is allowing employers and individuals to buy into Medicare Extra. Have a policy that you set up. And as I've been saying for a long time, it should be just one pool, one giant single payer pool where everybody pays in, and the risk is much lowered. Now they're saying that what they want to try and really do is they want to try and rein in some of the healthcare costs. There's going to be some private sector involved in this, as I understand, but it's moving towards the idea of single payer. They say that the major elements of the plan would be that every U.S. citizen and lawful resident of the country would be eligible. It would pay for preventative care if you need mammograms or physicals or yearly updates, checkups or that kind of stuff. Chronic diseases like diabetes would be covered. They would cover prescription drugs that are generics for free. There'd be dental and vision and hearing that would also be included. Because look, I've argued for years, what's the good of having health care if it doesn't include those other parts? As one person explained to me, if you have poor dental care, chances are you're going to have poor overall health. And if you have, heart trouble, one person said to me they had to go get, some dental work done before they could get heart surgery because they were afraid of an infection. And I'm going, right, it's something I had never thought of. But what if you don't have any way to pay for it? And again, this comes down to the average working family who doesn't have, $400 to put out for a cleaning and x-rays. So this seems good to me. Now they're sticking with kind of the ACA model in that there would be premiums and cost sharing, and the more you made, the more you'd pay. That seems sane and rational to me. Also, they say that employers would have the option of keeping their own health care or opting into the Medicare Extra. I think that's good. And the big one, you would have the government negotiating for prescription drug prices. All good stuff. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Steve Smith's going to be here to talk a little bit about what's going on in California with the big day of action tomorrow and what we can expect out of the California labor movement. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
It's desperate times, so desperate measures we explore. Marching on the Capitol to lobby leaders for involvement. 3,000 people screaming out, "Where's our government?" Lawsuits and arraignments, members under company surveillance. Public divided, either they love us or they hate us. Profit billions off our back, and it's still not enough. They should have took into account that we never give up. We'll be here one day longer. One day longer. The people's voice is stronger. We work hard for our money, we work hard for respect. Keep fighting for these rights for generations, it's next. One day longer. One day longer. The people's
Your
voice is
working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thoughts are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
It's been a problem that has been a long time in the making.
Minnesota settles with chemical industry giant over decades-long water contamination.
Sea levels are rising at an accelerating speed all around the world.
New report finds the next 5 years will determine sea levels for the next 300. Sea ice in the Arctic hits an ominous record low. Plus, Washington State becomes the latest state to block Trump's expansion of offshore drilling.
All of that Trump blocking and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
This agency shouldn't be in the business of saying we're going to favor certain sources of energy over others.
Unless those certain sources are oil or coal or gas. Am I right, EPA Chief Scott Pruitt? This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, we are celebrating the 9th anniversary of the Green News Report all week. My thanks to those who have stopped by bradblog.com/donate to help us try to continue into our 10th year. Thank you very much. And
yes.
What do you have for us today, Ms. Doyen?
Well, industrial chemical giant 3M has agreed to pay the state of Minnesota $850 million to settle a major case over contaminated groundwater. Minnesota sued the company in 2010, alleging it damaged its natural resources and contaminated drinking water after decades of the company legally dumping perfluorochemicals, or PFCs. Those are used in fire retardants, nonstick cookware, and other products.
Post-it notes? Are they used in Post-it notes?
I don't think so.
Because that's all I know that 3M does.
Well, they do other stuff, too.
I see.
Prosecutors alleged that 3M researched PFCs and knew that the chemical posed a threat to human health and knew that it was contaminating groundwater. Here's Minnesota Attorney General Lori Swanson in a press conference on Tuesday.
We think that the settlement will help solve a problem for Minnesota. It's been a problem that has been a long time in the making. For many decades, these chemicals, as I mentioned, were put into the ground. And we are very hopeful that the settlement can help fix that.
The $850 million will go toward upgrading municipal water system filtration technology and environmental cleanup. 3M agreed to the settlement just hours before it was set to go to jury trial, but it did not admit liability and did not admit any health impacts linked to PFCs.
They never do.
Meanwhile, in climate science, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced this week that January 2018 was the 5th warmest January ever recorded globally. That means that the last 4 Januaries now rank among the top 5 warmest on record. And that warming is wreaking havoc at the poles.
At the election polls?
No, at the planet's poles.
Damn.
According to the U.S. National Snow and Ice Data Center, sea ice at both poles has hit the lowest levels on record again, shattering records set just last year. The Arctic is seeing the fastest rate of decline in sea ice in at least 1,500 years, and it's believed to be at its lowest winter extent since human civilization began more than 12,000 years ago. And making matters worse, the Arctic is also currently in a heat wave. The northernmost weather station in the world, located in Greenland, this week recorded daytime temperatures above freezing, despite the fact that the Arctic is still in the total darkness of polar night. And now a new study dramatically illustrates just how much the decisions we make in the next 5 years will impact future sea levels.
At the polls?
Everywhere. Even under the best-case scenario, scientists say we've already committed future generations to at least 3 feet of sea level rise by the year 2300. Now, a new study published in the journal Nature calculates that for every 5 years of delay in ramping down CO2 emissions, we will add an additional 8 inches to the burden of sea level rise borne by all future generations. That means wiping out trillions of dollars of coastal infrastructure around the world and likely forced population migration. But finally, there is a sliver of good news. Washington State has vowed to use every tool in its arsenal to block the Trump administration's planned expansion of oil drilling off of its shores. Following the footsteps of California, Washington State Public Lands Commissioner Hillary Franz told Reuters that she will reject permits, land leases, and easements that are required to support the offshore oil drilling industry, like distribution pipelines. She said in an interview, quote, "We didn't invite you here, and we don't want you here."
Go Washington. For much more on all of those stories and the ones we couldn't get to, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget you can download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. Now in our 10th year of the GNR, thanks to those of you who have stopped by bradblog.com/donate. And what are the rest of you waiting for? 8 more inches of sea level rise? I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
The tide is high, but I'm holding on. I'm gonna be your number one.
Volkswagen just invested in Tennessee in a right-to-work state at a low cost with less health care. Why should we prop others up when other companies can compete in this marketplace? It's time to let these people learn the lesson the hard way.
Oh, yeah. Let them learn the lesson the hard way. Let them fail. Lower wages, less health care. Yeah, that's it. That is the Republican mantra right there. And the whole push for the no rights at work agenda. You know, as we've been saying for years. And now you got to give them credit. They're very open. They're very honest. And, you know, on Monday, when oral arguments happen, the National Right to Work Defense League, they're going to be jumping for joy. Mission accomplished banner, giant sock in the drawers, the whole 9 yards. And the question is what do working people do? How does labor respond? Tomorrow, Saturday, a big rally planned in cities all across the country, a show of force, if you will, which is why I think it's important to talk about why it's important. That's why I've asked Steve Smith to come talk with us. He is the communications director at the California Federation, at the California AFL-CIO. Steve, thanks for taking time for us.
Good evening, Rick. Great to be on the show again.
So tomorrow, big day of action, big rallies across the country, right?
Yeah, I'm actually in San Diego this evening. Tomorrow we're going to have thousands hit the street here in San Diego, rallying for workers' freedom to join unions, to have strong unions at work. That's what's happening all over the country.
So, you know, and what's the point of tomorrow? I mean, is it purely a show of power? Yeah. Is it an organizing tool? What are you hoping for?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all of the above. Look, there are very deep-pocketed corporate interests that would love to see unions go away. We're going to show them tomorrow that no matter what the Supreme Court does or what kind of laws they use to attack workers in states around the country, we're not going anywhere. We're standing together to fight for working people, the working class in this country. That's going to continue no matter what they throw at us.
So, I've had so many conversations around this issue and so many people chiming in, and there's this hope that I have, Steve, is that I think most people don't realize, how bad these decisions are, and how, the death of 1,000 paper cuts has killed in my view, almost killed the most prosperous working class in the history of civilization. Do you think this is one of those wake-up moments? Do you think out of this, finally, there will be that great shaking awake?
Yeah, I think we're already seeing it. Look, the resistance in this country to what Donald Trump and the corporate elite are trying to do is being powered in large part by working people. They're standing up in their communities to say, hell no, we're not going to take this anymore. We're not going to take the wealthiest people in this country taking all the income gains out of the pockets of working people. And I think this decision, this court case, is just yet another example of what the corporate elite, what the billionaires and millionaires and the politicians they bankroll have done to attack working people. And I think we're coming to that tipping point. We see it in the streets. We feel the energy, and it's up to us to seize upon this moment.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those which side are you on moments.
Yes, absolutely. Let me tell you who we are. We're the teachers who inspire kids to read at night. We're the nurses who, like my wife, when she had cancer, lovingly cared for her. We're janitors, we're sanitation workers, electricians, engineers, and each and every one of us is under attack by some of the greediest corporate special interests that we've ever seen in this country. We're talking about the Koch brothers. We're talking about these well-funded foundations. You just mentioned one, the National Right to Work Foundation, which is funded by everyone from the Heritage Foundation to the NRA. This is who is attacking working people in this country. Working people are ready to stand up and fight back.
And I think it's important to understand who's behind this, and which is why I'm glad you brought that up. I remember the video from Wisconsin of Scott Wagner talking with this Diane Hendricks. I don't know if you've seen it, but
I know what you're talking about.
She's going, but Scott, when do we get her right to work? And it was like, she was all tingly in the panties and go, oh, when do we get this? Oh, I'm so excited. I'm going, this is a woman who's a billionaire a couple of times over. What is it about this that she so wants? What is it that's got her all this worked up? And it's, in my view, it's absolute, pure, unadulterated power and control.
Well, they know, Rick, frankly, that unions are the last line of defense for working people in this country from a complete oligarchy. That's what this is really about. They're trying to take us out because we're, frankly, the only ones that can stop their agenda. And, despite our numbers having dwindled over the years, we still continue to make major gains for working people in this country up against some of the biggest corporate special interests known to man. Here in California, we're not just gonna rest on our laurels and play the defensive game. We're still going on offense. We took on Big Pharma last year, and we won with the strongest prescription drug bill in the country to lower prices for working families. We're going up against every corporate special interest we can, whether it's the oil companies or the Koch brothers or whoever it may be, because we are that last line of defense. If we're not in the halls of the Capitol fighting for working people, nobody's going to be, and that's what the corporate elite want.
Now, this no rights at work agenda is not something that you're not familiar with. Obviously, the case before Janus was the Friedrichs case. And you guys were intimately involved in that. How is this different from the Friedrichs case, or is it?
It's not. It's virtually the same case that they brought before the court. The case you're referring to, Friedrichs versus the California Teachers Association, started right here in California. It was the same litany of deep-pocketed corporate funders, Koch brothers, everybody else who were behind that case, that have now shifted their focus to the Janus case. It's more of the same. They are relentless, but I'll tell you what, Rick, we are as well. We have seen unions embark on internal organizing campaigns like never before to talk to every single member about the stakes involved with this case and the consequences that could arise from it. We haven't seen this kind of energy for years, and that's, if there is a silver lining here, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some people tell me that, you know, while looking at this case and the horror that it's going to bring, and obviously the loss of revenue and the ability to do a bunch of things, it could actually make the labor movement a bit stronger down the road because, as you've said, they're doing a ton of internal organizing, and it could make the movement more militant, which is where I've been saying for years the movement needed to go.
Yeah, and we're seeing that every day. I mean, it's not only this case, it's a lot of things going on in this country. Like I said, all the economic gains going to the top, while working people are losing their retirement, their health care. We've got Donald Trump, in a virtual war on working people right now. So yeah, working people are ready to stand up and fight back, and they're doing it through their unions, and that's a positive thing, no doubt.
So now, obviously, tomorrow, the big day of action in cities all across the country. And obviously, the point is a show of power and strength. What do you think what's going to happen Monday? What goes on the day after this? Because, look, you have these big events. There's energy. There's all of that. What are you hoping comes out of that?
Well, that energy goes right back into that internal organizing we talked about, Rick. That never stops. That's 365 days a year. You know, we have to do that. That's absolutely imperative to our future and to the future of working people, whether they're in unions or not. Look, here in California, we've done things like pass a $15 minimum wage. We've got paid sick days for every single worker in the state of California. These aren't things that benefit union workers. These are things that benefit all workers. Those are the stakes here. And, after the day of action, we're going to take the energy and we're going to keep moving forward, not only to strengthen our unions in the face of these attacks, but to continue winning gains for working people.
Now, you've hit on something that, the right has, I think, done a masterful job of pinning the labor movement with, that it's only a self-interest. It's only about the membership only. And I think, by pushing for higher minimum wages, for paid sick days, for all of those things that you ticked off, it is about workers in general all across the board, right?
Absolutely it is. And like I said, at the end of the day, they know we're the last line of defense for all working people against complete corporate rule of our economy. And that's why they're coming after us so hard. That's why we're seeing hundreds of millions of dollars funneled in to bogus cases like the Janus case, funneled into campaigns like Donald Trump. That's what, they know that we are that last line of defense. That's why they're working so hard to take us out, but it's not going to work. The labor movement is not going to die no matter what happens in this Janus case. Yes, it's going to hurt, but we're going to continue. We're going to not just survive. Our goal is to thrive again, and I think we need to take the energy from the resistance that's happening all around this country, the energy that we're going to see in the streets tomorrow, take that and build stronger unions to protect all working people.
It's something we absolutely have to do. But here's the thing, and this is where, I keep coming back to, this is not about freedom. This isn't about, the rights of a worker. This is purely, in my view, and you can disagree with me, it's purely about Machiavellian politic and money. And I look at something that Grover Norquist said. He said that there are 7 million public sector employees who pay $4.8 billion a year in dues. A third of them will quit. Try funding the modern Democratic Party without union dues. Good luck. I mean, at the end of this, that's really, in my view, what this is about.
Oh, you're absolutely right, Rick. There is, that they've admitted that that's what this is about. So I don't think there's any question at the end of the day that their goal is not just to kill the labor movement, it's to kill progressive politics in America. And that's killing efforts to fight for gun control. That's killing efforts for a clean environment. That's killing efforts for racial equality. That's what they're trying to do. And it's, they use these cases like Janus as a means to that end. So this isn't just about unions or union members. It's about all of us. It's about every progressive gain that we've had over the last century in America that's what they want to take out.
And to me, it's about stacking the deck even further and the pendulum swinging even further to the side of employers over workers in the ongoing eternal war between capital and labor.
Yeah, no doubt about it. They will do anything. We know how greedy they are. We know that they're funding these organizations that are bringing these cases before the court through shadowy front groups and with dark money. That's what they do. But what we do is organize, and that's what we're doing right now. That's what you're going to see in the streets tomorrow and Monday, and that's what you're going to see every day going forward, because there's no hope for America if there aren't any unions fighting the good fight for working people.
No, you're absolutely right. Is there any chance that this doesn't go the wrong way? I mean, is there any hope? I mean, I understand the Friedrichs case was a 4-4 tie, and now with Neil Gorsuch in the stolen Supreme Court seat, it's almost assured that it's going to be a 5-4 decision. Is there any hope, you think?
Well, I mean, the deck is clearly stacked in the favor of the big corporations and the billionaires, but you never know. We don't know what the Supreme Court is going to do. We don't know how broad or narrow the ruling could be. But again, for us, this is about preparing for a stronger labor movement in the future, regardless of what the conservative justices on the Supreme Court do in the next couple months.
Yeah, and regardless, it's about building stronger and building more active and engaged members. And ultimately, in my view, it comes back to politics. I mean, the last line of questioning I've got for you, because, this is going to be one of those decisions, I think, that's got to wake up a lot of those union members who may have voted for Donald Trump and saying, look, the attack, do you see the attack coming directly at you? Because, look, politics, at the end of it, I go back to my, high school government teacher who said, government decides who gets what. Our government right now is deciding the billionaires and their ilk are getting just about everything, and the rest of us are fighting over scraps. So I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And we're actually hearing that from members now. We're hearing from them directly that, look, whether I agree with every political position the union has or not, we're under attack. Our wages are under attack. Our pensions are under attack. Our health care is under attack. And they know exactly who's waging this war upon them. It's the boss. It's the billionaires. It's the corporate elite in this country. And they know that the only way for us to fight back is to have working people stand together. And that's what we do through our union.
Good stuff. Steve, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Best of luck with the rally and moving forward. Love to have you come back and talk to us again in the near future.
Would love to, Rick. Thanks very much.
Good stuff. Steve Smith, he's the communications director there with the California AFL-CIO. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1875. That was the day the National Marine Engineers Association was founded at a meeting in Cleveland, Ohio. The association represented steamboat engineers, most from boats navigating the Great Lakes. Being a steamboat engineer was risky business. Boilers could explode, fires could start on board, vessels could sink. Crews often had little training, and engineers that complained about the unsafe conditions or got caught talking union could lose their place on a ship. One history of the Great Lakes described the role of the engineer, writing, "Down in the bowels of the vessel, he controls not only the propulsion, but the steering, lighting, pumping, anchoring, and ventilation of the modern marine structure. And on the great warship, he is even responsible the maneuvering of the heavy guns." In 1854, the engineers in Buffalo banded together in an association of their own, and in the next 2 decades, other cities followed. But the engineers knew that the only way to have real power to change their working conditions was to form a national organization. 10 delegates from Buffalo, Cleveland, Chicago, Detroit, and Baltimore attended the founding meeting. One of the union's early causes was to stop American shipping companies from hiring foreign engineers in international waters. In 1884, Congress passed a bill requiring officers on American ships to be U.S. citizens. The Union grew to more than 20,000 members by the end of World War I. But the Union fell on hard times during the Great Depression, losing more than 75% of its membership. In an effort to shore up U.S. shipping, Congress passed the Merchant Marine Act in 1936, calling for the construction of 500 new ships. Today, the Union is part of the AFL-CIO under the name Marine Engineers Beneficial Association.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. President Trump is telling Mexico to crack down on the flow of Central American migrants into the United States, citing the threat posed by MS-13 gang members from El Salvador. Trump tweeted Friday that, quote, MS-13 gang members are being removed by our great ICE and Border Patrol agents by the thousands, but these killers come back in from El Salvador and through Mexico like water. Trump has been dialing up the fear factor over MS-13 a lot in recent months, including in his State of the Union address.
For decades, open borders have allowed drugs and gangs to pour into our most vulnerable communities. Tonight, I am calling on Congress to finally close the deadly loopholes that have allowed MS-13 and other criminal gangs to break into our country.
His solution to the MS-13 problem? To build a U.S.-Mexico border wall. But there's reason to suspect that approach would have little effect. Of the hundreds of thousands of immigrants detained by U.S. Customs and Border Patrol since 2011, just 0.02% are believed to have ties to criminal organizations in their home countries. According to FBI estimates, MS-13 comprises less than 1% of all gang activity in the United States. And the new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, Israel, will open on May 14th of this year, considerably earlier than many anticipated. According to reporting by Israeli reporter Barak Ravid, the facility that opens this year will be a temporary one manned by a small staff until the location of a permanent embassy is chosen and construction wraps up. The May 14th embassy opening this year is timed to coincide with the 70th anniversary of Israel's independence. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery for this war is one you're bound to.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So Joe Eastman sent me a link with just the title, Lest We Forget. And he sent me a link to a story about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. When we did our labor history tour, we went to the building where the fire happened. In fact, it's now part of New York University, and there's a plaque there that commemorates the moment where back in 1911, 146 mostly young women, a good number of them jumped to their deaths. So I think it was like 62 or 65 women and girls jumped from the 6th floor to their deaths. And it was one of those moments where it was a greedy boss who locked the exit doors out of fear that the employees were going to steal scraps. And it was one of those lessons that because just the year before you had the uprising of 20,000 where the entire garment industry in New York City had gone on strike. And these workers at the Triangle factory, they went back to work without a contract. They went back, they got the gains. They were the freeloaders, if you will. They got the gains to go back to work and didn't fight for the contractual language, to have that voice on the job that would have said, no, we're not going to allow you to lock those doors and lock us in like caged animals. And when the fire sparked, there was nowhere to go. And when the fire engine showed up, they had ladders that couldn't reach the 6th floor. So you had these people who were jumping to their deaths. And as the one person reminded me, the bodies would hit the ground and crack the pavement. And you would hear thud, thud, dead, thud, thud, dead, thud, thud, dead. Just kind of a reminder of where we came from. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here Monday.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email Rick at thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Its color like the tide of flood beneath the lunar sway, imperial, mysterious,